A Crime of Malfeasance by Germano Almeida. April 30th, 2022. There are three judges: Antonio Andrade Lopes Tavares, Jose Antonio Tavares, Quintino Castro Tavares. It justifies fixing these names, respecting them and even revering them. They are all doctors of law and were invited by João Silvestre Alvarenga in a live show on Democratic Rule of Law, with an impact on the arrest of Deputy Amadeu Oliveira. I'm not going to break down the speeches of each one here, especially since they all agree together. Deputy Amadeu Oliveira is illegally imprisoned. Everyone concludes that in the case of Amadeu, emotionalism of the magistrates took the place of reason. It took the place of rules. It took the place of principles. It is a shame, they conclude, that Cape Verdeans in general, but particularly the lawyers and some magistrates, continue passively watching this abusive breakdown in our legal system. I confess that I felt comforted. After all, not all Cape Verdeans prefer to close their eyes and ears to an injustice that certainly bothers everyone. There are, after all, some, such as the lawyer Jose Antonio Tavares, who assumed that he would criticize a judge's decision that would certainly embarrass any jurist. However, for these three, the evident complicity of the sovereign powers of this country in a gross illegality, and that only personal revenge, since there is no institutional revenge, can no longer justify, but at least make understood. After all, someone said, if revenge is the supreme pleasure of the gods, how can one not accept that it is also for mere mortals? However, under the avenging and vengeful scolding of Judge Simu Santos, all the offences and insults, whether big, small, medium or even minor, committed by the lawyer Amadeu Oliveira against some magistrates, must already be more than settled by the almost 8 months in prison that he already accumulates. The fact, however, is that, sooner or later, Amadeu will be released. With or without trial, with or without conviction, he will certainly be released, because the security measures themselves end up having a time limit. And so, the national question that we will have to ask will be this: how will history judge this 9th legislature of our highest organ of so-called democratic power? What is to be said of the supreme body of power in the state of Cape Verde, the sovereign body par excellence, which in 2021 was allowed to relegate one of its members to the inquisitorial power of judges, without ever having worried about the strict legal conditions that must surround the arrest of a deputy? That on the one hand, because also the judicial magistracy, particularly the performance of Judge Simu Santos, will never be able to emerge unscathed from this cruel and vindictive quagmire in which it agreed to get into. Because SS is a career judge, with years of service, with experience, until he became a judge. He is not, therefore, inexperienced, on the contrary. So, let us admit your possible doubt, even if in fact unreasonable, about whether or not Amadeu, as a deputy, committed a crime of attacking the rule of law when he accompanied an individual to leave the country. Let us admit this subjectivity, thus a kind of existential doubt. As it is rightly said, each had its sentence. But as for a deputy not being able to be arrested out of flagranti delicto without a decision by the National Assembly having previously been issued on a judicial indictment order, there can be no longer any shadow of doubt about that. That is already something objective. It is clearly in the laws, black and white. No justice official ignores it because it is not even susceptible to dubious interpretation. Therefore, Judge Simu Santos knows this, always has known, and having, despite this certainty, ordered the arrest of Deputy Amadeu Oliveira after the first interrogation to which he was subjected, without being legally authorized to do so, that inadmissible fact must rightly be considered an act of bad faith, or of abuse of power, coming from someone to whom the community attributed the dignity of a judge of law, a judge, in short, someone who had the duty to be an example for us others, therefore above the petty passions of everyday life. More serious, Judge Simu Santos was wrong, it is true, but he had more than enough time to break through. But no, he didn't. He chose to persist in the error, and still does, with ever greater abundance of argument. And so, for 8 months now, a man has been bitter in prison, not because the law commands it, but rather because of the simple whim of a judge, who, due to the special role he is charged with playing in society, has an absolute duty not to be dominated by passions. As a judge, Dr. Simu Santos is certainly on his way to achieving the veneration of the Supreme Court of Justice, and it would be natural if we didn't have to ask, with all the frankness and loyalty that the situation imposes, whether Cape Verde deserves to have as a judge in the Supreme Court of Justice someone who blatantly ignores and violates the elementary principles of law. Because it is not admitted, even as a hypothesis, that the judge is unaware of the care that surrounds the figure of deputy of the nation while in office, it must be concluded that he was and is committing a crime of malfeasance, Art. 328 CP. A judge who, against the law and with the intention or conscience of harming or benefiting someone, within the scope of the powers conferred on him in criminal proceedings, makes an order or sentence that has the consequence of depriving a person of liberty or their maintenance illegally, shall be punished with a prison sentence of 2 to 8 years, arresting and keeping a deputy in prison in the exercise of his functions, without the same being pronounced by a competent judge and without a suspended mandate. In 1979, in a single-party regime, a deputy was arrested and taken by the police to the court of S. Vicente to be tried, accused of any crime. Only with the prior authorization of the National Assembly, he dispatched the judge without even knowing the accusation. A fortiori. Now that we are said to live in a democratic regime, it should be a fortiori, unless we accept that we have a fourth organ of sovereignty. The government of judges.